Hey guys, welcome back to the YouTube channel. So today I'm going to be giving my medium-term review of the iPhone 15 Pro Max from the perspective of the everyday consumer, just to see how it's held up after 4 months of use and to help you decide whether or not it's worth picking one up in early 2024. To put it quite shortly, I think that the iPhone 15 Pro Max is a solid phone, not that that should come as a surprise to anybody, and that we've finally hit peak iPhone, if we hadn't already. Yes, there will inevitably be small and tiny refinements to the iPhone going forward, but I think that for all intents and purposes, the hardware on this phone is close to perfect as we can get. I guess the only thing I'd question is whether or not it's worth the $1,200 price tag on it, but that's something I'll get into later. So without further ado, let's get straight into the video. So if we take a look at the design, Apple basically fixed my biggest grievance with the iPhone 14 Pro design last year, and that was the fact that the phone felt pretty uncomfortable to hold whilst using caseless, because the stainless steel edges would just dig into your palms and hurt after a while. And on top of that, the phones were generally quite heavy, which was a key reason why I always opted for the smaller Pro models over the Pro Maxes. However, now Apple switched to titanium, which is meant to be more durable, and it's a lot lighter and a lot more comfortable to hold because the edges are now slightly curved. So for all intents and purposes, the 15 Pro and Pro Max look the same from the outside, but they feel so much nicer to hold whilst in the hand. And in terms of durability, they've held up really well as well. However, I'd still recommend installing a screen protector of some sorts, just because the screens on recent iPhones have been very prone to scuffs and small scratches. And this is just a general trade-off that you're going to get with screens like this, because if you want to make the glass on a phone more shatter resistant, i.e. not break when you drop it, you have to use a softer glass material. But the issue you now have is that these softer materials tend to scratch more easily. So something like your car keys, credit cards, even just dust in the air can often be enough to cause some pretty ugly looking scuffs on your phone screen. But otherwise, in terms of durability, the 15 Pro Max, in fact most iPhones, they're just fine. One thing that hasn't held up so well though is this fine woven case. For about the first month, the case was fine. I wasn't getting any of those scratch marks that the internet seemed to be raging about. But then November came and it started raining here a lot in the UK. And you can just see that the edges of this thing are peeling off. So yeah, Apple is either going to have to completely rethink fine woven next year or seriously reduce the price, because there's no way that you can justify charging £59 for a product like this in good faith. But moving back to the iPhone, the bezels this year are slightly slimmer, which doesn't make a whole lot of a difference as far as functionality goes, but it does look and feel a lot more premium and modern and future-proofed. And as far as weight goes, I said this in my original review, that this phone feels just as light, if not lighter, than my old 14 Pro, which means that I can now get the additional battery life benefits of the 15 Pro Max without sacrificing the lightweight. Speaking of battery life, my experience has been really good. The phone has just enough juice to last me for about a full day of moderate and maybe even heavy use. And if I'm using my phone lightly, I can usually extend this into the second day, which has definitely eased a lot of the battery anxiety that I used to get with using iPhones. And it's definitely a big step up from my last iPhone 14 Pro, which just had atrocious battery life. I guess the only thing that concerns me is that after 108 charge cycles, I'm already at 98% health, which isn't promising, but on the whole I haven't really had many complaints. Now, of course, everyone's own use case is going to be different. You know, things like the signal in your area and the brightness of your display are going to massively skew how much battery life that you can get out of this thing. But essentially the way I like to test how good a battery is through something I like to call the London day trip test. So let's say I decide to travel down to London for the day, or somewhere that's a few hours from where I live. The question I ask myself is, could my phone hypothetically last me through the entire day if I accidentally forgot all of my chargers and left them at home? And I actually got to do this test last week when I went down to London for a conference. So I left the house at 8:40 AM with 100% charge, listened to loads of music with data whilst on the train, responded to a bunch of emails and messages, use the phone for navigation whilst I was there, Apple Pay for transport, basically the usual smartphone stuff, only I didn't have access to a charger. And what I found out is that the 15 Pro Max can basically get me through the day. So when I arrived home at 10 p.m, I had 18% remaining, which is pretty impressive. So yeah, battery life is fine. I still think that we can squeeze a few additional hours out of it, which is something I'd like to see improvements to over time, simply because most of the time I'm running my phone between 80 to 20%, which is what's meant to be good for your phone's long-term battery health. But that also means I'm only taking advantage of 60% of the phone's battery capacity. So when I say the 15 Pro Max is good enough to last you through a full day, what I'm really saying is that it can last from 100% to 0% over a day or more, which might be a slightly extreme case if you're only charging your phone between 80 and 20%. Moving on to performance, I haven't really noticed any major differences in speed. Apparently the RAM has been increased from 6 to 8 gigabytes, but I personally haven't noticed. Like if there's an app that I've not opened for a few hours, the OS will still likely have forgotten it. I suppose it's good for gaming because thanks to this fancy thing called ray tracing, you can now run full console level games on this phone. But I'm not a gamer, so I can't really comment on that. And all of this is totally fine, since iPhones are fine when it comes to performance. In fact, for most smartphones out there above sort of the $600 or $700 price tag, performance is basically a non-issue. And I actually think it's a good idea for smartphone manufacturers to future-proof their chips in this way, in order to give themselves enough headroom to tackle all of the processing power that on-device AI is going to demand in the coming years. So later this year, if we do get a bunch of AI features announced at WWDC in June, this iPhone 15 Pro Max should hopefully be able to handle a lot of those tasks with relative ease. If we take a look at the camera, it's again been really great. If any of you were wondering why I've been carrying an iPhone 6s Plus and not a 15 Pro Max this entire time, it's because I'm actually using my 15 Pro Max to shoot this footage right now. So yeah, you can see that the camera system on this iPhone basically carries this YouTube channel. But if I'm being brutally honest, as an average consumer, it's nice to know that we can finally shoot 24 megapixel photos and portrait shots automatically, and we've got this 5x telephoto lens and log video as well. But to be honest, I've not really made too much use of them outside running this YouTube channel. And that's not necessarily an indictment of the camera system of this phone itself. I think I'm just not the target audience for it. Again, it's the difference between being a prosumer and an actual pro user. Another thing that I'm guilty of not making much use of is the USB-C port. Because I tend to charge almost exclusively via MagSafe, I tend not to use the charging port on this phone that much, other than for connecting it to my external display so I can showcase people photos and videos in full resolution. And I still have a bunch of lightning cables lying around anyway for my other lightning accessories. But again, it's nice to know that this port, well not this one, but the USB-C one on the iPhone 15s is fully future-proofed, and that in 2 to 3 years, I can hopefully get rid of all of my lightning cables once everybody else in my family has transitioned over to USB-C. Another big highlight features of the iPhone 15 Pro was of course the action button, and on the whole it's pretty good. What I like about it is that you can customize it to pretty much anything you want through the Shortcuts app. So if you want to quickly take a reminder or caption an idea through a quick note or control your smart home, you can do just that. And personally, I've set mine up to show this folder of all of my most commonly used shortcuts, like creating reminders and calendar events or controlling my Nest thermostat. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below whether you'd like to see a video going over that, which I can definitely do. But on the whole, the action button is great. Is it useful? Kind of. Is it a game changer? Probably not. And as far as dislikes go, I don't really have many for this phone. I never experienced any of the overheating issues that most people on the internet were talking about. Really, most of the troubles that I have had have been down to glitches in iOS. Like, if I'm trying to take a quick note of something urgent, my keyboard will just randomly freeze. Or if I'm streaming music, Apple Music just constantly crashes, which forces me to restart the app. So if Apple could focus on fixing bugs in their next iOS update, which the rumor mill does seem to indicate is what they're doing, that would be much appreciated. But yeah, as far as hardware goes, there isn't really much more that I could ask from the iPhone. Like, sure, there are refinements you can make to, say, the selfie camera over time, especially in low light situations. And as I said earlier, a nice bump to battery life over time would be cool. But you'll notice that a lot of these requests are very minor improvements that target a very niche group of people. And I guess that brings us to the inevitable question: have we hit peak iPhone? And of course, some of you might argue that for the average consumer, we hit peak iPhone years ago with the release of the iPhone 10. For somebody like my mum, who still uses her smartphone like it's just a phone, peak iPhone for her really would have been the iPhone 6 or the 6S. Realistically, the only reason for her to upgrade every 3 to 5 years is because the battery on her phone will have degraded. And naturally, new OS updates mean that older iPhones tend to slow down over time and they're eventually just straight up not supported. So I think it really does depend on your use case. Like, if you're a video creator who wants to replace their camera with their smartphone, then there are still improvements that Apple can make to things like the quality of stabilized footage or slow motion footage, which I feel has been neglected for a long time. Really, I think the biggest improvements to the iPhone will come from the software side and improving iOS over time. For example, generative AI. Apple has obviously been caught off guard by that, and they're currently spending in the billions trying to play catch up. And supposedly, one thing they might try and do is implement some sort of on device AI support on the iPhone. So you can imagine having access to a hopefully smarter version of Siri that can do most of the things that ChatGPT can do, but without needing to connect to sort of the Wi-Fi and transfer data over the cloud. Like, just think about how useful that could be for a lot of normal everyday consumers. So yeah, that was just a little tangent on where I think the iPhone could be heading going forward, because honestly, there's not really much you can do with a product that's this mature. It's like a washing machine. Everyone needs one, and most people have one. And when your old one breaks down, you'll get a new one. But the hype for new ones isn't quite as strong as it used to be, and that's okay. So my conclusion is that the iPhone 15 Pro Max, a low-key great refinement. Now, if you don't care about having that always on display or the fancy camera or promotion, I'd honestly just go for the iPhone 15 Plus instead, because you're going to get much better battery life at a lower price. And if you're on a 13 or 14 series iPhone, it probably doesn't make sense to upgrade this soon. But if you're coming from an iPhone 12 series or older, and you want just the most premium smartphone out there, now's a great time to do that. You're likely going to be very happy with it, but yeah, it's an iPhone. And I think we all know that Apple is pretty good at churning out decent phones each year, so don't expect anything revolutionary. As always, if you found this video useful, leave us a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.